I'm Dr. Julie Webb of LitCentric.com. Welcome to writing. In this video, we're going to talk about writing in a science experiment. And there's actually lots of different genres and ideas that we can explore in this particular lesson. So we're going to have students actually predict if something can sink or if it floats. And this is an easy activity for students to do either with you in a classroom, even at home they can replicate it. This activity can even be an independent literacy center. And actually, I recommend doing that, actually encouraging students to do it with you together and then releasing it to them later on so they can actually replicate it and maybe even test out some new items to see if they sink or float. It's a highly engaging activity. I've done this activity at home and at school, and it's always a lot of fun. So for this activity, you might want to download this sheet that I created that's in the comments. The link is there for you. And it says, will it sink or float? Now, you don't necessarily need a fancy sheet like this. I don't want you to think that writing is required to have worksheets all the time. That's certainly not the case. And I try to create my pages in the most simple way possible, free of illustrations that don't support the idea. I don't need cute things going on my page. I want it to be very straightforward, and I want it to be laid out in a way that helps the writer organize their thinking so that they can write clearly. This is actually a support that I provide for students, but I don't always provide this. Later on, when students duplicate this, they don't need a sheet like this anymore. They can do it on their own. So for the sink or float, there's a couple of things we want students to do. One of the genres they're going to be writing in is list making. Yes, making a list is actually a genre. So here, students actually have this page organized so that the list is going to go from top to bottom. Sometimes lists go left to right, and they have commas in between each item, or commas in a series. But here, the students are going to write top to bottom. So they're going to create a list of different objects that they've collected around the room or you've provided for them. And they list those here on their own. I don't care if they're spelled perfectly or not. The idea is for students to have an authentic reason to write, and by me checking their spelling later, I can see what stage of development they're in, and I can support them in other ways as writers. So here they write down their list of objects, and then they use this sentence frame to help them predict. Now, when I do this with my kids the first time as a whole group, or even in a small group setting, I may have this posted up on the board or on a sentence strip or something like that, because I want students every single time orally to actually produce that sentence, and then we test to see if we were correct or not. So the sentence says, I predict the blank will blank. So we take one of the objects, let's say it's a sponge, and we say, I predict the sponge will, and we say either sink or float. Then we go ahead and test it in a little tub of water or in a sink and see if it sinks or floats. We document sink or float to see the actual results of the test. Sometimes my students like to mark a little check if they were correct, if it was sink or float, or a little X if they were incorrect. So we either confirm our prediction or we reject our prediction. And I like when students want to take it a little further like that, because that's how they're starting to manage their data that they're collecting. And that's a really important thing for a writer and a scientist to do. So once they've completed a sheet like that with you, they may want to continue this type of idea on their own. So here's what a student did. She created a simple list again, top to bottom. She actually has two lists here. She has her objects in one list, and on the other side, she recorded if the objects sank or if they floated. So she has marble, sink, ball, sink, rock, sink, block, float, cork, float. So those are the objects that she tested. So this activity is a wonderful way to get students to organize their thinking, to manage a lot of information, and to think through a little bit afterwards about how they might process the information that they've collected. So to analyze those results, something you might want to ask students to do to follow up is, why don't you describe which object was the biggest surprise to you and why? Or why don't you ask some questions about why certain objects floated and why certain objects sank? That might actually lead into some great discussions in your science time with students and get students to reflect on the work that they did and offers another opportunity for writing. So I hope you try it out with your writers and have a great day at school.